The Persian rug was rough against my cheek, smelling of dust and expensive wool. My throat had turned into a burning tunnel, closing rapidly, squeezing the air out of my lungs with the force of a vice grip. The room was spinning, the crystal chandelier above blurring into a single mocking eye of light. I didn't hear panic. I didn't hear him call for help. I counted 5 seconds of silence, long enough to understand who I was married to. Only moments ago, the evening had been a fairy tale. Our 5th anniversary. The penthouse was filled with the soft jazz Julian loved, and the table was set with our wedding china. He had poured the wine, a vintage red that tasted like velvet, and toasted to us. But then came the appetizer. A scallop foam. He insisted I try it first. The moment it touched my tongue, I knew. It wasn't just seafood, it was laced with cashew oil. I am deathly allergic. Julian knew this. He carried my EpiPen in his jacket pocket whenever we went out. He was the guardian of my life. I had collapsed, grasping at my throat, knocking a wine glass onto the floor. It shattered, red liquid pooling around my head like a premonition of blood. "Julian? Pen?" I wheezed, my voice a broken rasp. He moved quickly at first. He rushed to the sideboard where we kept the emergency kit for home. He grabbed the EpiPen. I saw the yellow cap. Relief flooded through my panic. "He's got it. I'm going to be okay." He ran back and slid to his knees beside me. And that was when the world stopped. This is the moment that broke me. This is the moment where the man I loved died, and a monster took his place. He held the pen hoveringly over my thigh. It takes 1 second to uncap it, another second to jam it in. But he didn't move. His face, usually so expressive and warm, went completely slack. It wasn't the paralysis of fear. I have seen fear. Fear is frantic. Fear is messy. This was still. This was calm. This was waiting. 1. I stared up at him, my vision darkening at the edges. "Julian, please. I can't breathe." My fingers clawed at his pant leg, but my grip was weak, fading. 2. He didn't look at my eyes. He looked at my chest, watching the erratic, desperate rise and fall as I fought for oxygen. He looked curious, detached, like a child watching an insect struggle in a jar. 3. He shifted his weight, and then he did something that froze the blood in my veins, colder than the lack of oxygen ever could. He glanced at his watch. He actually checked the time. 4. I saw his eyes flick back to me. There was a calculation in them. He was doing the math. If I died right now, tonight, before the lawyers' meeting next week regarding the estate planning, everything would default to him. No contest. No messy divorce, just a tragic accident. 5. A subtle exhale left his lips. Not a gasp of horror, but a sigh of impatience. He was disappointed that I was fighting so hard. He was giving death a head start. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Traitor! 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 Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the dining room swung open. "Mrs. Vance," I heard glass break. It was Maria, our housekeeper. She wasn't supposed to be here tonight. We had given the staff the night off. The change in Julian was instantaneous and terrifying. The cold calculation vanished faster than a magic trick. His face crumbled into a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. "Eleanor, oh my God!" "Hold on!" he screamed, his voice cracking perfectly. He jammed the pen into my thigh with a force that bruised. "Maria, call 911. She's not breathing. Hurry!" The medicine burned as it hit my system, shocking my heart back into a steady rhythm. Air rushed into my lungs, sweet and painful. As the blackness of unconsciousness finally claimed me, the last thing I saw was Julian weeping over me, stroking my hair, putting on the performance of a lifetime for an audience of one. But I took the truth with me into the dark. He hadn't saved me. He had been interrupted. Consciousness returned to me in slow, painful waves. The first thing I registered was the sound, the rhythmic, mechanical beep, beep, beep of a heart monitor. Then came the smell, that unmistakable blend of strong antiseptic and stale coffee that permeates even the most expensive hospital suites. I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids felt weighted with lead. My throat was raw as if I had swallowed broken glass. "She's moving, doctor, she's moving." The voice was familiar. It was filled with a desperate, frantic energy. It was the voice of a man who had almost lost his entire world. It was Julian. I forced my eyes open. The harsh fluorescent lights stung, blurring my vision for a moment before the room came into focus. Julian was right there, leaning over the bed rail. He looked terrible, in the most perfectly curated way. His expensive shirt was rumpled, his tie was undone, and his eyes were red and puffy. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, though I knew it had only been hours. Oh, thank God, he choked out, grabbing my hand. His palms were warm and damp. My instinct was to recoil. I wanted to snatch my hand away from the monster who had checked his watch while my airways collapsed. I wanted to scream, to accuse him, to demand the police. But my body was too weak, paralyzed by the residual effects of the drugs. Water, I managed to croak, the word barely a whisper. He was in motion instantly. He poured water from a plastic pitcher into a small cup and held a straw to my lips with trembling hands. Slowly, baby. Just a sip. I drank, watching him over the rim of the cup. He wiped a stray tear from his cheek. I was so terrified, Eleanor, he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. He sat on the edge of the bed, burying his face in the mattress near my hip. When you fell, I froze. My brain just shut down. I couldn't process what was happening. It felt like I was moving through quicksand. A chill went through me that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. He was doing it already. He was rewriting history. I froze. It was the perfect defense. A jury would forgive a husband who panicked. They would forgive a man who went into shock, but they wouldn't forgive a man who calculated. He was planting the seed of his innocence before I even had the strength to speak. I thought I lost you. He sobbed into the blanket. I lay there staring at the top of his dark, perfectly cut hair. The rage inside me was cold and sharp. You didn't freeze, Julian. You sighed. You were annoyed that I was taking too long to die. The door opened, and a doctor in a white coat stepped in, checking a digital chart. Mrs. Vance, welcome back, the doctor said with a professional smile. You gave us quite a scare. Your anaphylactic reaction was severe. Julian lifted his head, looking at the doctor with the humble, exhausted expression of a survivor. You're very lucky, Mrs. Vance, the doctor continued, looking at Julian with admiration. If your husband hadn't administered the epinephrine when he did, well, we would be having a very different conversation. Seconds mattered last night. He saved your life. I felt the air leave my lungs again, but this time from sheer psychological horror. The doctor believed him. The nurses probably believed him. To the world, Julian was the hero. If I started screaming now that he had waited, that he had checked his watch, I would sound like a woman suffering from brain damage or paranoia. I was the older, wealthy wife, he was the devoted, younger husband. The narrative was already built against me. Julian squeezed my hand tighter, looking into my eyes with a depth of love that made my stomach turn. I just did what anyone would do. I love her more than anything. I realized then that I was completely alone. I was in a room with a man who wanted me dead, and everyone else thought he was my savior. I had to make a choice. If I confronted him now, he would finish the job later, perhaps more subtly next time. A fall down the stairs, a mix-up with my heart medication. I needed time. I needed proof. I summoned every ounce of strength I had left from my years in the cutthroat world of real estate. I softened my eyes. I squeezed his hand back. Thank you, I whispered, forcing a weak smile. My hero. Relief washed over Julian's face. Not relief that I was alive, I knew, but relief that I had bought the lie. He leaned in and kissed my forehead. Rest now, my love, he murmured. I closed my eyes, feigning sleep. But in the darkness behind my eyelids, I was wide awake. The loving wife had died on the dining room floor. The woman in this hospital bed was a soldier, and the war had just begun. Returning to the penthouse felt less like coming home and more like re-entering the scene of a crime. The private elevator ride up to the 45th floor was suffocatingly silent. Julian stood close to me, his arm wrapped around my waist, supporting my weight. To the doorman downstairs, we looked like the picture of marital devotion. A fragile wife recovering from a health scare and her doting, protective husband. But to me, his arm felt like a heavy chain. As the doors slid open, the familiar scent of our home, white tea and cedar, hit me, but it felt tainted. I glanced toward the dining room. The rug was gone, the floor shone with a fresh polish. I had the cleaners come early this morning, Julian said softly, noticing my gaze. I didn't want you to see any mess. I wanted a fresh start. A fresh start, I thought bitterly, or a clean crime scene. He guided me to the master bedroom, his movements gentle, almost choreographed. You need to rest, Elle. The doctor said no stress. He pulled back the heavy duvet of our king-sized bed. I feel gross from the hospital air. I'm going to take a quick shower. Do you need anything before I go? No, I whispered, sinking into the pillows and letting my eyelids droop. Just sleep. I'll leave the bathroom door ajar so I can hear you, he said, kissing my temple. The contact made my skin crawl, but I didn't flinch. The moment the shower turned on, creating a wall of white noise, my lethargy vanished. Pure adrenaline flooded my system, overriding the exhaustion in my limbs. I didn't have much time. 10 minutes, maybe 12. I threw off the covers and forced myself to stand. My knees wobbled, but I pushed through the dizziness. I crept into the adjacent study, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. I sat at the desk and woke up the main control panel of our smart home system. My fingers trembled as I typed in the passcode. 1024. Our anniversary. The irony tasted like ash in my mouth. The interface loaded. Security. Cameras. Dining room. I scrolled back the timeline. Yesterday, 8:42 p.m. I pressed play. On the high-resolution screen, the nightmare unfolded in cold, digital clarity. I saw myself collapse. I saw the wine bottle shatter. I saw Julian rush to the sideboard. So far, it matched the lie he told the doctor. Then came the moment of truth. On screen, Julian knelt beside my convulsing body. He held the auto-injector. I leaned closer to the monitor, my breath hitching. He stopped. The timestamp ticked by. 8:43, Torosing. He wasn't frozen. His body language wasn't rigid with panic, it was relaxed. He shifted his weight comfortably on one knee. He looked at me, then he looked at his wrist. The camera angle was high, capturing his face perfectly. There it was. The smoking gun. It wasn't a blank stare of shock, it was a look of utter, cold contempt. And then, a detail I hadn't even consciously registered in my delirium, he sighed. An impatient, annoyed sigh, as if my dying was taking too long and inconveniencing his evening. 8:04. He checked the watch again. Maria, the housekeeper, burst into the frame. The transformation was instantaneous. The relaxed predator became the frantic husband in a split second. It was terrifying to watch how easily he switched masks. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle the sob tearing at my throat. Tears blurred my vision. It was real. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. The man showering in the next room had gambled with my life. He had waited for me to die. Suddenly, the sound of the water in the bathroom stopped. Panic. I quickly closed the window and deleted the recent access log, a precaution from my days managing corporate data. I wiped the screen of the control panel with my sleeve and stumbled back to the bedroom as fast as my weak legs would carry me. I dove under the covers just as the bathroom door creaked open. "Elle? You okay?" Julian called out, steam billowing around him, a towel wrapped low around his waist. I lay perfectly still, my back to him, regulating my breathing to mimic the heavy rhythm of deep sleep. My heart was pounding so hard against the mattress I was sure he could hear it. "Fast asleep," he whispered to himself. I felt the mattress dip as he sat down on the edge of the bed. He didn't lie down, he just sat there, looming over me. I could feel his gaze burning into the back of my neck. "So close," he murmured, his voice barely audible, stripped of all warmth. "So damn close." A single tear slid down my nose and soaked into the pillowcase. I didn't move. I lay there in the dark with the man who wanted me dead, realizing that the only way to survive was to become a better actor than he was. By the third day of my recovery, the silence in the penthouse had become a physical weight. Julian played the role of the nursemaid to perfection. He brought me herbal tea, fluffed my pillows, and read aloud from novels I used to love. But every time his phone buzzed, his eyes would dart to the screen, and a subtle tension would tighten his jaw. "I have to go into the office for a few hours, Elle," he said that afternoon, buttoning his jacket. He checked his reflection in the hallway mirror, a little too carefully for a man just going to handle paperwork. "The charity foundation is preparing for the gala. They need my signature on the venue contracts." "Go," I said weakly, coughing for effect. "I'll just sleep. Don't worry about me. Call me if you need anything. I mean it." He kissed my cheek, a dry, perfunctory peck, and left. The moment the elevator doors slid shut, I threw off the invalid's blanket. I wasn't sick. I was angry. And anger is a powerful fuel. I didn't call the police. I called Cole. Cole was a private investigator I had used years ago during a hostile takeover in my real estate days. He was expensive, discreet, and terrifyingly efficient. I had texted him the night I checked the cameras. 30 minutes later, I was sitting in the back of a nondescript black sedan parked 2 blocks away from a quiet cafe in the West Village. I wore a scarf wrapped around my head and large sunglasses, looking less like a CEO and more like a ghost. Cole slid into the front seat, tossing a manila envelope onto my lap. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You were right to be suspicious, Mrs. Vance," Cole said, his voice gravelly. "He's not at the foundation office. He's at the cafe across the street." My hands shook as I opened the envelope. The first photo was innocent enough, Julian walking down the street, but the second one was a dagger to the heart. Julian was sitting at a corner table, his hand resting intimately on the knee of a woman. I knew her. Sienna. She was 26 with chestnut hair and wide, innocent doe eyes. She was the executive assistant I had personally hired for Julian 2 years ago. I had mentored her. I had given her advice on her career. I had even bought her a birthday gift last month. "It's a cliché, isn't it?" I whispered, staring at the photo where Sienna was laughing, throwing her head back at something Julian said. "The husband and the secretary." "It's worse than a cliché, ma'am," Cole said, turning to face me. "It's a conspiracy." He pulled out a second stack of papers. "Bank statements. I dug into the foundation's accounts like you asked. They've been clever, setting up shell companies as vendors for events that never happened. Catering, decoration, logistics. Small amounts at first, but in the last 6 months, it's escalated. They've siphoned off nearly $2 million. I felt the blood drain from my face. $2 million. That was why Julian had been so stressed lately. "But here's the kicker," Cole continued, pointing to a date on the spreadsheet. "The annual independent audit is scheduled for next month. If you are alive and well, you'll sign off on the audit preparation. You'll see the discrepancies." The puzzle pieces clicked into place with a sickening snap. "But if I die," I murmured, finishing his thought. If you die, the audit gets postponed due to family tragedy. Julian takes control as the surviving spouse and executor. He covers the tracks, fires the auditors, and hires his own people. He gets away with it." I looked out the window at the cafe. Through the glass, I could see the vague silhouette of my husband. He wasn't just a cheater. He was a thief and a murderer in the making. The 5-second hesitation wasn't an impulse. It was a business decision. He needed me dead before the first of the month. "What do you want to do?" Cole asked. "We have enough for a fraud case. Maybe attempted murder if we push the medical negligence angle." I touched the cold glass of the car window. "No. If I go to the police now, he'll lawyer up. He'll claim it was just bad bookkeeping. He'll get a slap on the wrist for the money and walk away from the murder charge." I looked back at the photo of Sienna laughing. They looked so happy, so triumphant. They thought they had won. "I don't want him in a cell yet, Cole," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "I want to destroy him. I want him to think he's won, and then I want to take everything away. Every dime, every hope." I handed the envelope back to Cole. "Keep watching them. Get me everything. Passwords, safe combinations, travel plans. I'm going to plan a little surprise for my husband." The law offices of Sterling and Associates were located in a pre-war building in Midtown, a fortress of old money, oak paneling, and discreet silence. It was a world away from the flashy, glass-walled skyscrapers Julian preferred. I walked past the receptionist without an appointment, marching straight to the corner office. "Eleanor?" Arthur Sterling looked up from his mahogany desk, removing his reading glasses. At 60, with silver hair and eyes that had seen every trick in the legal book, Arthur was the closest thing I had to family. He had been my father's lawyer, then mine. He had been the one person who refused to toast at my wedding to Julian, offering only a tight, polite nod. "I need you to lock the door, Arthur," I said, my voice steady, though my hands were shaking inside my pockets. "And I need you to disconnect the office Alexa." Arthur didn't ask questions. He stood up, his tall frame imposing yet comforting, and did exactly as I asked. He pulled a chair out for me, not across the desk, but next to it. "Tell me," he said. I didn't speak at first. I simply took out my phone and played the clip I had recorded from the security feed. The 5 seconds of silence, the sigh, the glance at the watch. Then I placed the photos Cole had given me on the desk. Julian and Sienna, the bank statements, the theft. Arthur watched the video in silence. His jaw tightened until a muscle jumped in his cheek. When the video ended, he didn't look at the paperwork. He looked at me. There was a fury in his eyes I had never seen before. A cold, dangerous rage directed at the man who had hurt me. "I should have crushed him 5 years ago," Arthur said, his voice low and vibrating with suppressed anger. "I knew he was a shark, Eleanor, but I didn't know he was a butcher." "He needs me dead before the audit next month," I said, leaning back, the exhaustion finally hitting me. "He's stealing from the foundation. If I die, he covers it up. If I live, he goes to prison." Arthur took my hand. His grip was firm, grounding. Unlike Julian's damp, deceitful palms, Arthur's hands felt like safety. "He isn't going to prison just yet. We are going to make sure he has nothing left to go to prison for." He walked to his safe and pulled out a thick file, my estate planning documents. "We are going to rewrite history, Eleanor. Effective immediately, we are moving your liquid assets into an irrevocable trust. We'll backdate the paperwork so it appears this was done months ago. But we won't tell him." "He monitors the joint accounts," I reminded him. "We aren't touching the joint accounts. Let him keep his allowance," Arthur sneered. "We are touching the portfolio he thinks he's inheriting. We're going to empty the kingdom before the king even takes the throne." He pulled out a legal pad and began sketching a diagram. It was a trap, a financial labyrinth. "We need bait," Arthur said, looking up, the sharp gleam of a master strategist in his eyes. "He's greedy. Greed makes people blind. We need to offer him something so big, so tempting, that he stops trying to kill you for a few weeks because he needs you alive to sign for it." I understood immediately. A new venture. A massive investment he can control. "Exactly," Arthur nodded. "You're going to propose a new development project. Something worth 10 times what he's stealing. You'll tell him you want him to lead it. You'll tell him you need his vision. He won't make a move on you while he thinks he's about to get the keys to the treasury." "And when he signs the contracts," I asked. "Those contracts will incriminate him in federal fraud so deep he'll never see daylight again. It won't just be embezzlement. It will be grand larceny and conspiracy." Arthur poured 2 glasses of scotch from a crystal decanter, no ice. He handed one to me. "To the long game," he said softly, his eyes softening as they met mine. "And to staying alive." I took the glass. The amber liquid burned pleasantly going down, warming the cold hollow in my chest. For the first time since the dining room floor, I didn't feel like a victim. I looked at Arthur, really looked at him, and saw the worry lines etched around his eyes, lines that were there because of me. "Thank you, Arthur," I whispered. "Don't thank me yet," he replied, putting his glasses back on. "Now, go home. Be the loving wife. Feed the shark. I'll sharpen the harpoon." The beach house in the Hamptons was usually my sanctuary, a place of cedar shingles and salt air where I escaped the noise of the city. But this weekend it felt like a cage. The late autumn wind howled around the eaves, rattling the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a churning gray Atlantic. The nearest neighbor was a mile away. If I screamed, the only witness would be the seagulls. "This was a great idea, Elle," Julian said, carrying our bags into the foyer. He looked every inch the devoted husband in his cable-knit sweater, his smile easy and boyish. "Just the 2 of us, no doctors, no business, just rest." I forced myself to smile back, though my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "I missed this place," I lied. "I missed us." Dinner was a test of nerves. Julian insisted on cooking. I sat at the kitchen island, watching him chop vegetables with a large chef's knife. Chop, chop, chop. The rhythm was hypnotic and terrifying. Every time he turned toward me with the knife in his hand to emphasize a point, I flinched internally. When he poured the wine, a heavy dark red, I watched the bottle like a hawk. I waited until he poured his own glass and took a drink before I even touched mine. Paranoia was my new best friend. "You seem quiet tonight," Julian observed, swirling his glass. His eyes were searching, calculating. He was checking for cracks in my performance. It was time to spring the trap. I set my glass down and took a deep breath, channeling the formidable CEO I had been before I became a victim. "I've been thinking, Julian, about what the doctor said, about how short life is." I reached across the marble counter and covered his hand with mine. His skin was cool. I realized I'd been holding on too tight. To the company, to the assets. I haven't let you lead. Julian went still. The predator in him woke up. What do you mean? I want to build something new, a legacy project. The North Fork Development, I said, dropping the name of the fake project Arthur and I had concocted. It's a $50 million venture. High risk, high reward. I'm too tired to run it, Julian. I want you to take the helm. Complete autonomy, full signing power. I saw the change in his eyes instantly. It was subtle, but to a woman who had watched him for 5 seconds of silence, it was blinding. The pupils dilated. A flush of excitement crept up his neck. It was pure, unadulterated greed. He wasn't looking at his wife. He was looking at a blank check. 50 million? He repeated, trying to keep his voice steady, but failing. Eleanor, are you sure? That's a massive responsibility. I trust you, I said, delivering the lie with Oscar-worthy sincerity. You saved my life, Julian. Who else could I trust? He stood up and came around the island, pulling me into a hug. I buried my face in his chest so he wouldn't see the revulsion in my eyes. I could hear his heart racing. Not from love, but from the adrenaline of a jackpot win. I won't let you down, Elle. I promise, he whispered into my hair. I know you won't, I thought. Because you need me alive to sign the transfer papers next week. Later that night, while I pretended to read by the fireplace, Julian excused himself to take a walk on the deck. I waited 10 seconds, then picked up the iPad connected to the external security microphones, a feature we installed for storm monitoring, but now a spy tool. Through the crackle of the wind, his voice came through, low and urgent. It's happening, babe. She's handing me the keys to the kingdom. 50 million. No, listen to me. We don't need to do that anymore. Not yet. She needs to be alive to sign the initial funding release. We wait. We play the long game for 2 more weeks, and then we're set for life. He laughed, a sound that chilled me to the bone. Yeah, she's eating out of my hand. She thinks I'm her hero. I put the iPad down, my hands trembling. I had bought myself 2 weeks. I had successfully bartered for my own life using his greed as currency. I looked out at the dark ocean, crashing violently against the shore. The man on the deck thought he had won the lottery. He didn't know he had just signed his own confession. The grand ballroom was a sea of black tuxedos and shimmering silk gowns. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the city's elite, who had gathered for the Foundation's annual charity gala. The air smelled of expensive perfume and anticipation. Julian stood beside me, his hand resting possessively on the small of my back. He looked triumphant. In his mind, tonight wasn't just a party, it was his coronation. Tonight, I was scheduled to announce the North Fork project and publicly hand him control of the $50 million venture. You look breathtaking, Elle, he whispered, leaning close to my ear. Everyone is watching us. They know we're a power couple. Yes, I replied, smoothing the fabric of my dress. They are definitely watching. Across the room, standing near the bar, was Sienna. She wore a dress that was slightly too bold for a charity event, a deep crimson that screamed for attention. She caught Julian's eye and gave a subtle, conspiratorial smirk. They thought they were invisible. They thought I was the blind, doting wife, happily walking into their slaughterhouse. It's time, Mrs. Vance, the event coordinator said, touching my arm. The podium is ready. My heart gave a single, hard thump. This was it. I walked up the steps to the stage. The spotlight hit me, blinding and hot. The murmur of the crowd died down to a respectful silence. I looked out at the hundreds of faces, friends, business partners, rivals, and right in the front row, Julian stood, beaming, ready to step up and accept his prize. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice clear and steady, amplified through the speakers. Tonight, we are here to talk about the future, about legacy, about trust. Julian nodded encouragingly, raising his champagne glass slightly. My husband, Julian, has been my partner in everything, I continued. He has been by my side through sickness and health, and recently, he has shown me exactly what kind of man he truly is. Julian's smile widened. He buttoned his jacket, preparing to walk up. I promised to announce a new $50 million venture tonight, I said. But first, I think it's important that we review the current investments managed by my husband. I clicked the remote in my hand. Behind me, the massive projection screen did not show the architectural renderings of the North Fork luxury condos. Instead, it flickered and displayed a spreadsheet. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. The spreadsheet was blown up for everyone to see. Rows of transactions were highlighted in red. "These are transfers to Vanguard Logistics and Blue Horizon Events," I narrated coldly. "Shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. Companies that have no employees, no offices, but have received over $2 million from this charity in the last 6 months." Julian's smile froze. It didn't fade naturally, it shattered. He looked around, confused, as if waiting for the punchline. "Eleanor?" he mouthed, taking a half-step forward. "What is this?" "And for those wondering about the management style of our new director," I continued, ignoring him, "I think his own words describe it best." I clicked the remote again. The audio from the Hamptons beach house blasted through the ballroom speakers, crisp and undeniable. "It's happening, babe. She's handing me the keys to the kingdom. We play the long game for 2 more weeks. She's eating out of my hand. She thinks I'm her hero." The silence in the ballroom was deafening. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of the room. Every head turned toward Julian. The admiration in their eyes had instantly morphed into shock and disgust. Sienna, realizing what was happening, dropped her glass. The sound of shattering crystal echoed like a gunshot. She turned to bolt toward the exit, but the heavy double doors were already opening. But it wasn't waiters walking in. It was a team of officers in dark uniforms, followed by 2 men in suits who looked unmistakably like federal agents. Julian stood alone in the center of the dance floor. The spotlight that he had craved so desperately was now an interrogation lamp, stripping him bare. He looked at me on the stage, his face pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. I looked down at him, my expression unmoving. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply held the microphone one last time. "I counted 5 seconds of silence when I was dying, Julian," I said, my voice echoing through the stunned hall. "Now, you can count the years." I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a heavy thud, signaling the end of his world. The silence following the drop of the microphone didn't last. It shattered into a cacophony of whispers, gasps, and the heavy, authoritative tread of boots on the parquet floor. The spell of the gala was broken. The ballroom was no longer a celebration of charity, but a hunting ground for justice. "Julian Vance," a stern voice cut through the noise. 2 federal agents in dark suits, badges flashing under the chandelier lights, flanked Julian. Behind them, uniformed police officers formed a perimeter, blocking the exits. Julian spun around, his face draining of all color. He looked like a cornered animal, his eyes darting from the agents to the crowd, and finally, desperately, to me. "Eleanor," he shouted, his voice cracking. Tell them this is a mistake. It's a misunderstanding." He tried to lunge toward the stage, toward me, but an agent grabbed his arm. Julian violently jerked away, his composure disintegrating. "Get your hands off me. Do you know who I am?" "You are a suspect in a federal investigation regarding wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy," the agent recited calmly, snapping a pair of cold silver handcuffs onto Julian's wrists. The metallic click echoed louder than any music. Meanwhile, near the velvet ropes of the exit, a high-pitched scream erupted. "No! Let me go! I didn't do anything." It was Sienna. She had tried to slip away in the confusion, but a female officer had intercepted her. The poise of the ambitious executive assistant was gone. She was thrashing, her expensive crimson dress tangling around her legs. "It wasn't me," Sienna shrieked, pointing a manicured finger across the room at Julian. "It was him. He made me sign those papers. I was just following orders. He's the one who wanted her dead." The crowd gasped. Sienna had just publicly corroborated the murder plot. Julian's head snapped toward her, his eyes bulging with rage. "You lying witch," he roared, struggling against the agents holding him. "You came to me. You told me how to hide the money. Don't you dare pin this on me." It was pathetic. The 2 people who had plotted to destroy me, who had laughed about my death in the privacy of my own home, were now tearing each other apart like starving rats on a sinking ship. Their love hadn't lasted 5 seconds in the face of consequences. I stood on the stage, watching them. I felt a hand on my elbow. It was Arthur. He had come up the stairs quietly and was standing beside me, a silent sentinel. "It's over, Eleanor," he whispered. Julian looked up and saw us. He saw Arthur standing where he used to stand. He saw me, untouchable and cold. The realization finally hit him. I hadn't been the victim. I had been the architect of his downfall. "You," Julian spat, his face twisted into an ugly mask of hatred. You planned this. You played me. I looked down at him, my expression impassive. I simply gave you a rope, Julian, I said, my voice not amplified but carrying clearly in the hush. You were the one who tied the noose. The agents shoved him forward. Let's go. As they dragged him out, flashing cameras from the press, who had miraculously appeared at the perfect moment, blinded him. He ducked his head, trying to hide, but it was too late. His face and his shame would be on the front page of every paper by morning. Sienna was led out behind him, weeping hysterically, her makeup running in dark streaks down her face. When the heavy doors finally closed behind them, the ballroom remained quiet for a heartbeat. Then, slowly, the murmurs began again, but the tone had changed. There was no pity in the room for me. There was respect. I turned to Arthur. My legs suddenly felt heavy, the adrenaline beginning to fade. Get me out of here, I whispered. Arthur nodded, offering me his arm. The car is waiting out back. Let's go home. The sound of the judge's gavel hitting the mahogany block was sharp, final, and arguably the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, and grand larceny, I sentence you, Julian Vance, to 20 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom let out a collective breath. I looked at Julian. He sat at the defense table, slumped in his chair. The arrogant, charming man in the bespoke suit was gone. In his place was a pale, hollowed-out figure in an ill-fitting gray jumpsuit. He turned to look at me one last time as the bailiffs pulled him to his feet. His eyes were no longer calculating or hateful. They were just empty. He had gambled everything on 5 seconds, and he had lost his entire future. Sienna had taken a plea deal, testifying against him in exchange for a lighter sentence of 5 years. She refused to look at him, or me, as she was led away. I didn't stay to watch them leave. I didn't need to see them in chains to know I was free. Arthur walked me to the car. It's done, Elle, he said softly, squeezing my shoulder. Yes, I replied, looking up at the clear blue sky. It's finally done. The next week was a blur of cardboard boxes and packing tape. I decided to sell the penthouse. It was a trophy from a life I no longer recognized, a glass tower filled with memories of a marriage that had been a lie. I didn't want the view of the skyline anymore. I wanted to see the ground. I donated Julian's clothes to charity. The expensive watches, the cufflinks, the designer shoes. I sold them all and put the money into a new grant for women rebuilding their lives after domestic abuse. It felt poetic. On my last day in the city, I stood in the empty living room. The spot on the floor where I had collapsed was just bare hardwood now. The ghost of the dying woman was gone. I left the keys on the kitchen counter and walked out without looking back. I moved to a sprawling, quiet estate in Connecticut, a place with a wild, overgrown garden and a porch that smelled of pine needles and damp earth. It was a house that breathed, unlike the hermetically sealed penthouse. For the first few months, I did nothing. I slept without medication. I drank tea on the porch while watching the deer graze near the tree line. I let the silence of the house wrap around me, not as a threat, but as a blanket. One afternoon, while unpacking a box from the attic, I found them. My old easel and a set of oil paints, untouched for 30 years. Before business, before wealth, before Julian, I had wanted to be an artist. I had traded that dream for the boardroom, thinking power would make me happy. I set up the easel in the sunroom. The canvas was white, stark, and intimidating. I picked up a brush, the wood familiar and rough against my fingers. I didn't know what to paint. Then, I remembered the ocean at the Hamptons, the gray, churning water that had crashed against the shore while I plotted my survival. I dipped the brush into a deep cerulean blue. The first stroke was hesitant, but the second was bold. Then the third. Hours melted away. When I finally stepped back, my hands were stained with paint, and my back ached, but I felt a lightness in my chest that made me want to weep with joy. I wasn't just Eleanor Vance, the CEO. I wasn't just the victim of a gold-digging husband. I was a creator again. The phone rang, breaking the quiet. It was Arthur. Checking in, he said, his voice warm. How is the country life treating you? It's quiet, Arthur, I said, looking at the half-finished painting. But it's a good quiet. I have some papers for you to sign regarding the sale of the penthouse, he said. Do you mind if I drive up this weekend? I could bring dinner? I smiled, wiping a smudge of blue paint from my cheek. Dinner sounds lovely. And Arthur? Bring wine, but maybe not the red. We both laughed. It was a small, fragile sound, but it was real. I was 56 years old, and my life was just beginning. 2 years had passed since the gavel fell. The small gallery in downtown Greenwich was filled with the warm, golden light of a late October afternoon. Outside, the maple trees were ablaze in reds and oranges, dropping leaves onto the cobblestone streets. Inside, the air smelled of fresh apple cider and oil paint. I stood in the corner, adjusting the tag on a large canvas titled "The Storm Breaks." It was a painting of a turbulent gray ocean crashing against a jagged rock. But in the upper corner, a sliver of sunlight was piercing through the clouds. It was violent, but it was also hopeful. It was the first piece to sell that evening. "You have a red dot on this one already," a deep, familiar voice said behind me. I turned around. Arthur was standing there, brushing a stray autumn leaf from the shoulder of his wool coat. His hair was fully silver now, shimmering under the gallery lights, and his smile reached his eyes. Eyes that had watched over me when I couldn't watch over myself. "Arthur?" I smiled, feeling a genuine warmth spread through my chest. "You made it." "I wouldn't miss your first solo exhibition for the world, Eleanor," he said, handing me a small bouquet of white hydrangeas. "Besides, I heard the artist is quite the catch." I laughed, taking the flowers. "The artist is tired. My feet are killing me." "Then let's get you out of here," he said effortlessly. We left the gallery in the capable hands of the manager and stepped out into the crisp evening air. The town was quiet, settling down for the night. We walked side by side toward the small park near the river, our footsteps crunching on the fallen leaves. For a long time, we didn't speak. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of my marriage with Julian. It was a companionable silence, the kind of silence you can only share with someone who knows your darkest stories and chooses to stay anyway. We sat on a bench overlooking the water. The wind was cool, and Arthur unbuttoned his coat to wrap it around my shoulders. The gesture was simple, instinctive, and completely devoid of calculation. "Do you ever think about him?" Arthur asked quietly, looking out at the river. I paused. I knew who he meant. Julian was currently serving year 2 of his 20-year sentence. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not with anger anymore. I think about those 5 seconds of silence often." Arthur turned to look at me, surprised. "Why?" "Because," I said, looking at him, "if he hadn't hesitated, if he had been a better actor or a slightly more impatient killer, I would be dead. Or worse, I would still be married to a man who didn't love me. Those 5 seconds of cruelty were actually a gift. They woke me up." Arthur reached out and took my hand. His skin was rougher than Julian's, his fingers calloused from weekends spent gardening, but his grip was solid. It was real. "I've been waiting a long time, Eleanor," he said softly. "I didn't want to push you while you were healing, but I don't want to wait anymore." My heart skipped a beat, not from fear, but from a fluttering excitement I thought belonged to a woman half my age. "You don't have to wait," I whispered. He brought my hand to his lips and kissed it gently. There were no fireworks, no grand speeches, no hidden agendas, just 2 people who had weathered their own storms, finding a harbor in each other. "I have a new house," I said, squeezing his hand. "It has a studio and a very large porch that is perfect for drinking coffee on Sunday mornings." "I make excellent coffee," Arthur smiled, a twinkle in his eye. "I know," I replied. As we sat there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, I took a deep breath. The air was clean. My heart was full. I had lost 5 seconds of my life to betrayal, but in exchange, I had found an eternity of peace. And looking at the man beside me, I knew that the best chapters of my story were just beginning. I sit on the porch swing of the Connecticut house, wrapped in a thick wool blanket. The wood creaks rhythmically beneath me, a sound that used to annoy me in the city, but here, in the quiet of the country, it sounds like a heartbeat. Inside, through the screen door, I can hear Arthur humming an old jazz tune. He's making dinner. It's not a 5-star meal prepared by a private chef, and we aren't drinking vintage Petrus. It's a simple roast chicken, and the wine is a modest bottle we bought at the local market. Yet the smell drifting out to the porch is richer and more inviting than anything I ever experienced in that cold glass penthouse. People often ask me if I'm bitter. They ask if I miss the galas, the diamonds, the envy of New York society. They wonder if the trauma of that night haunts me. I tell them the truth. I have never been richer than I am right now. I traded a diamond cage for a wooden porch. I traded a man who looked at his watch for a man who simply holds my hand. I learned that age isn't a curse to be hidden with Botox and younger husbands. It is a privilege. Every wrinkle on my face now comes from smiling, not from worrying if I am enough. We spend so much of our lives fearing the fall, terrified of the moment everything crashes. But sometimes you have to hit the ground to realize you can stand up taller than before. I am 58 years old. I paint, I garden, I love. And for the first time in my life, I am not racing against the clock. I am savoring it. I look out at the fireflies dancing in the twilight. I take a deep breath of the cool, pine-scented air. I am safe. I survived. But the marriage didn't, because I never forgot those 5 seconds.